Great to be here.
Today, we're tackling something pretty significant, I think. It's this trend, why so many Gen Z folks seem to be moving away from, the traditional career path.
Yeah, it's definitely more than just a headline. Our sources, particularly an episode from the Future Desk podcast.
Right, the one called Why Gen Z is Quitting Traditional Careers for Good.
Exactly that one. It suggests this is a real fundamental shift in how this generation is thinking about work, about life.
So we want to dig into what's driving it, what they're actually looking for instead.
And maybe what it all means longer term. Understand the core of this change.
Okay, so let's get right into it. That traditional idea of the dream job, stability, the climb up the ladder, maybe a pension.
It's a whole package.
Yeah, that package. Why does it seem like Gen Z sees it differently? The source even used the phrase a prison sentence.
That's a stark term, isn't it? It really highlights the contrast. What used to look like security and predictability.
Now feels like confinement to them.
Increasingly, yes. The podcast points to this feeling that the old bargain, the traditional work contract, is kind of broken.
Broken how? What specifically?
Well, things like wages not keeping up at
Yeah.
all.
Especially with inflation and housing costs.
Exactly. Plus, jobs maybe feel less secure than they used to. Benefits aren't what they were.
And add student debt onto that pile.
Right. So that whole narrative of just work hard in this one company and you'll be set, it just doesn't resonate the same way. It feels perhaps unrealistic to them.
Okay, so if that traditional path is losing its appeal,
Hmm.
what is appealing? What are the key things Gen Z is looking for in their work?
The source really zeroed in on three core things: autonomy, meaning, and flexibility.
Autonomy meaning flexibility.
They want control over their work. They want it to feel important, to have a purpose.
And they want flexibility in how and where they do it, I assume.
Precisely. That's where you see the explosion of the freelancer economy, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And digital nomads.
Digital nomads, side hustles becoming almost the norm. It's about crafting a work life that fits their life.
We see so many examples, like the podcast mentioned TikTok creators,
YouTubers, people running Shopify stores.
indie game developers, coaches.
Yeah, all sorts. And the common thread is often using these online platforms.
As tools, not just hangouts.
Exactly.
Mhm.
Tools for freedom, for self-expression, and yeah, for making a living outside the old structures.
But it's not like everyone is rejecting traditional jobs entirely, right? What about when they do work for established companies? Their expectations seem different there, too.
That's a really important point. It's not always a total rejection. But yeah, their expectations within those jobs are different. Hybrid work, for instance.
That's huge now, isn't it?
Mhm.
Almost table stakes for many.
It seems that way. And they're looking for companies with a real mission, something beyond just profit.
Purpose-driven work.
Yes. And actual support for mental health, not just lip service. Plus, a genuine focus on work-life balance.
And the source suggested they're pretty willing to walk if those needs aren't met.
More so than previous generations, it seems. They'll vote with their feet if the environment doesn't align with those core values of flexibility, purpose, and well-being.
It feels like the pandemic, especially 2020, must have poured fuel on this fire.
Oh, absolutely. It was a massive catalyst. Suddenly, remote work wasn't theoretical. It was the reality for millions.
It kind of proved it could be done on a large scale.
Right. And for Gen Z, just entering the workforce around that time, well, that became their normal.
So the illusion, as the source put it, of that stable, office-centric career might not have even formed for them in the same way.
Exactly. Their baseline expectation was already shifted.
Now, the terms great resignation and great reinvention came up. Can you unpack that distinction, especially for Gen Z?
Yeah, that's key. While they were part of the broader Great Resignation, it wasn't just about quitting. It was often about reinventing.
So not just leaving a job, but starting something new.
Often, yes, like the examples we heard. Launching an Etsy store, maybe learning to code from YouTube tutorials.
Starting a consulting gig, building a community on Patreon.
Right. It's proactive. It's about building something for themselves.
So it's maybe less like job hopping in the old sense.
Then more like building a portfolio.
Yeah, like building a diverse set of skills, income streams, almost like they're running their career like a startup.
That's a great way to put it. Very entrepreneurial in spirit, even if they aren't all technically entrepreneurs. Adaptable, building a collection of assets.
Which naturally brings up the question I'm sure a lot of people listening are thinking.
Sustainability.
Exactly. Is this sustainable long term? Can you really pay the bills, maybe raise a family as a content creator or freelancer indefinitely?
It's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And the source acknowledges that, yes, there's potential for burnout, for instability. These paths aren't necessarily easy,
No guarantees.
definitely no guarantees, but interestingly, the source also highlighted some countertrends, like a real focus on financial literacy among Gen Z.
Oh, in what way?
Seems like many are quite proactive about learning to invest, about saving, maybe being more cautious about debt than previous generations were at their age.
So, trying to build a financial safety net themselves, rather than relying on an employer's pension plan.
Perhaps. It suggests an awareness of the risks and an attempt to mitigate them through personal financial planning.
And it also feels like part of this is redefining success itself. It's not just about the money or the title anymore.
That seems to be a huge part of it. There's a visible shift in values. Things like minimalism aren't just aesthetic choices, they reflect a different priority set.
Or van life, or prioritizing remote work specifically, because it allows a certain lifestyle.
Right. It suggests that time, experience, and purpose are weighing much more heavily against traditional markers of wealth and status. It's a different calculation of what makes a good life.
So if this is the mindset, what does it mean for traditional companies? How do they even attract and keep Gen Z talent if the old playbook isn't working?
They have to adapt significantly. The source was pretty blunt about that.
And it's got to be more than just like putting a foosball table in the break room.
Oh, way beyond that. Those are superficial perks. Gen Z seems to be looking for fundamental changes. Genuine flexibility, real control over when and where work happens.
Purpose.
Purpose is huge. They want to feel like their work matters, that the company stands for something meaningful, and to be treated like, well, whole human beings.
Lives outside of work.
Exactly. Respect for boundaries, support for well-being, transparent leadership. These are becoming non-negotiables.
So it's a much deeper cultural shift required within organizations.
It really is. And the underlying message is, if companies don't provide this kind of environment.
Gen Z will just go elsewhere or create their own alternatives.
Precisely. They've shown they're willing and able to do that. It's less about rebellion maybe and more like evolutionary pressure, pushing the system towards something potentially better, more human-centered.
Okay, so if we were to really boil down the main takeaway from our deep dive today.
I'd say it's this. Gen Z isn't rejecting work. They're rejecting a specific model of work that they feel has failed to deliver on its promises of security, fulfillment, and balance in today's world.
Right. And instead, they're actively building alternatives, paths that prioritize that autonomy, that meaning, that flexibility we talked about.
Exactly. They're architects of their own work lives in a way previous generations perhaps weren't or didn't feel they could be.
Which leads to a final thought maybe for you listening. Is this Gen Z shift just a generational thing? Or could it be maybe an early signal of a much broader rethinking of work and life priorities?
Yeah, one that might resonate with people in other generations too, especially those who've also felt the bumps and limitations of the traditional career track.
Definitely something to chew on.
Mm.
What parts of this shift, if any, feel relevant to you? What might be worth considering in your own career, your own life?
Good questions to ponder.
Indeed. Well, thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
Thanks for the discussion.